right? In the second study, we studied 4 schools within one school district, about 160 teachers and other educators. And we found that the schools that we were doing, that we provided the training with, plus the consultation, had more knowledge, change, and more empathy for the kids. They also indicated more concerns about their self-efficacy. And you might be thinking, why is that? Well, we didn't actually focus that training and the early parts of the consultation work on skill building. There's a lot of attitude work. So it made sense that as they got to know more, they started questioning their self-efficacy to deal with those kids, right? In another study that we did, because we wanted to, like, we recognized that one-time trainings weren't going to be enough to shift a whole building, right? We worked with those schools, with those first 2 principals, and then subsequently with 4 more principals, on developing trauma leadership teams within the school. Teachers could self-nominate, principals could nominate, and people could nominate one another. But we had a composition of educators across different grade levels, across different types of functions. School counselors, school psychologists, school nurses, the phys ed teacher, the science teacher, so on and so forth. Like a good cross-section, as good as you're going to get for an early morning meeting of teachers. And what we had to do is we had to focus on creating this group, on creating norms for the group, on establishing what our purpose was and what it wasn't. We need to create a sense of safety in that group, because we're modeling a trauma responsive approach. And that means having strong relationships. It means being able to have trust in one another and to feel safe, to know exactly what you're going to be doing, right? Clear expectations and opportunity for discussion. So we did this work, and we focused deeply on systemic change. Some of the educators at the training and also at these strong leadership team meetings would sometimes ask, well, let's focus on the community because that's where they need it the most. And we always pushed back and said, well, let's focus on us. Let's focus on what we can do for ourselves first, and then we'll get to the folks in the community. Right? But we're not going to address the problems in the community if we can't even address the problems in our own building. Right? So we needed to do asset assessments, asset maps. Where are we strong and where are we not? What are we doing in our work? One school that I'm working with right now, the school is built for about 500 students and it's got about 900 students. It's about 3 different gang territories near that school. So the kids are coming into school, walking through 3 different gang territories. And they're experiencing this high level of stress. The teachers are stressed. The building is stressed, right? Some teachers, I try to talk to the teachers about like individual trauma responses, but also organizational trauma responses, right? So at the organizational level, just like at the individual level, is a fight, flight, freeze response, right? The flee response is these teachers who are retiring early, right? But totally understandable. They're transferring, getting out of that school. I get it, I understand. Freeze response might be the quiet critters, or the folks who are just doing the bare minimum, just to get by, just to get through the day. Not doing anything more, not wanting to do anything more. The principal of this building and the school, because of that, were engaged in a fight response. And the fight response in this case is throwing everything at the problem, all at the same time, everywhere, right? So without intentionality, it's just more work, right? Without attention to implementation fidelity, it's just more busy work, right? It's just mess. So we need to slow the group down, and we showed them the multi-tiered systems support model and what could be recommended, what we might recommend for a trauma responsive school. We laid out the things that you could do at the tier 1 level, the tier 2 level, the tier 3 level. We presented to them what they were doing at each of these levels And instead of a pyramid in the school, it was like block. Right? And so like, okay, what can we do at that tier 1 level so we can support more of the kids? Right? So we're in that work right now. And we let the teams prioritize that. This is your building. I'm an outsider. I'm in here for a couple of years, 3 years, 4 years max, and then I'm out. So you have to own this. And the trauma leadership team is really important for me, at least, because I think of it as a sustainable approach. It can kind of continue even if a person or two leaves. All 10 of them leave, then you got problems, right? But the likelihood of that happening is not great. So anyway, there's a lot of great outcomes associated with that. We saw in some of the initial schools that we saw a reduction in teacher chronic absenteeism, which is important because the kids need stability, they need consistency, right? And the teachers were coming to school more, not because they were forced to, but because they felt like they were being heard by their administration, who was building programming during the day, before the day, to support them. Building opportunities for teachers to check out of classrooms, to tap out when they were feeling really dysregulated. We gave those teachers strategies for how to deal with conflict in the moment. These are some of the quotes that what happened to that? That's not showing up. But in a study that we published, some of the members of the team shared some of their thoughts. Professional development, whether it be articles or videos or books that we were reading and then having time to reflect on them, were really valuable. Just to think about that ability, just to think and we have time to reflect, it helped us to drive conversations more deeply. We have more people talking about the trauma responsive approach. We're making a difference with our colleagues. So these members of the trauma leadership team were feeling like they were making a difference, right? By having the conversations, the daily conversations, not big professional development, but the daily conversations. Instead of just having one charismatic person come from the outside and do a talk, these were leaders that we were building within the school itself. Nothing's showing up. I'm not sure why. So I'm not going to read it to you because it just, like I said. So, and these other quotes from these other teachers. One shared, when you have a difficult student to think about, when you have that difficult student to think about some of these things, like, you know, did they have a rough morning? Just kind of realizing that they're not just being bad to be bad, you know. There's something meaning behind the behavior, and you can sometimes help. You don't have to just go to discipline. You can kind of get them out of there just by trying to respond to them in a sensitive manner. And another person shared, I was just how I was. I didn't know that is being trauma informed. But the biggest thing I've taken away is to not take it personally. I've been doing this since 1990, when I first started teaching, and I've seen a big improvement from 2 years ago. Another teacher shared, when I first started learning about what trauma informed and ACEs are, and about how all these things impact kids, I was like, wow, we have a lot of these kids that kind of fit the behaviors and the emotionality. And, you know, the dots weren't just connecting as to why, you know, we were seeing some of these things. And it was like a light bulb for me. Oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. And then, you know, I feel like the knowledge is power. So like the PDs were important, the trauma leadership teams, deepening the conversation, having them talk to other people were important. From the trauma leadership team, we were able to build self-regulation spaces with the schools lead. We never forced any ideas on them. The schools, we gave them like, here's what can be done. Attachment is an issue, self-regulation is an issue, and helping people develop competencies, the kids develop competencies is an issue, important. So a lot of the schools ended up developing peace corners and peace spaces in their rooms. Some of you may have heard of those. And if not, I'm happy to talk more in depth about them. But they built these spaces, and we did a mixed method study on peace spaces and peace corners. We had intended to also interview young people who were making use of these peace spaces, but March of 2020, actually a lot of pandemic disrupted the research we were doing, but I paled the comparison like a good gold line, right? So it's like, Chris, get over yourself. It's just a study or 2 or 3, maybe some grant money. But like in the whole scheme of things, like what's going on, right? So anyway, the kids talked a lot about the peace corners and the peace rooms. They highlighted that our usage data that we were able to get from the schools indicated that the kids are using the space to talk to an adult. And the next 2 reasons are related: to learn how to meditate and to practice breathing, right? So about like 70% of the kids were using that space more. We're using that space to learn those strategies and just to be able to connect with people. And the primary reasons why they were talking and going to the peace spaces was because of conflict at home or with their peers or with the teacher. So I know I'm like way over time. So some of the things that we're developing in our next phase is we're working with our partners as part of that collaborative Resilient Lehigh Valley to strip away, I shouldn't say strip away, to bring back mindfulness the way it was initially intended. So in some of our work with the schools, you heard teachers say, well, we just need to teach kids to calm down, right? That sounds lovely. But if the system, getting back to the original point, but if the system is still toxic, teaching these kids to calm down is just helping them to adjust to a maladjusted system, right? So we always are putting forward this idea that we need to change the system first. But we also recognize that kids do need and could benefit from some skills, but we're not just going to teach kids just to breathe their problems, right? So what we're doing with radical mindfulness is we're integrating these ideas from liberation psychology, critical consciousness, right, conscious raising work, with mindfulness. And some of the original works of mindfulness in Buddhism itself, and there are contemplative practices across many different cultural groups, right, and religious groups. So we want to bring back contemplative practices situated within our unique cultural contexts, right? Whether it's African-centered, whether it is indigenous or Buddhist, right? We want to bring it back. And so we're actually working with community members right now, parents and other leaders, to figure out how we can do this. And we're also using a framework to develop a culturally responsive mindfulness approach that also integrates anti-racism, right? Because a lot of times when we feel angry, or I feel angry, and I don't feel angry too often, but when I do, it's because of something that I'm seeing as unjust. I have a choice at that moment to lash out and be physical, or to choose a different path, right? And sometimes it's going to require being physical. And I don't look like I can, but I can, right? But we're going to have to do it. So we're shifting away from race neutrality, where control and self-regulation are like the desired outcomes, to liberation. So we're developing this curriculum now. We're on target to get final feedback on the curriculum in the summer, and then we're going to pilot it over the fall, and we're going to test it against treatment as usual. So we're working on that, and it's invisible. Okay. That was a really nice slide that I wanted to show you. But there were some takeaway points that I wanted you to have. And first is that racism is a form of trauma. Racism existed, it's not a new thing. Racial trauma is not a new thing. It's something that has existed in this country despite a lot of really good efforts. I want to say to you that trauma influences how the educators that you work with operate and function at a personal level, their own personal trauma, but also the secondary trauma that they're experiencing, and that those influence how they're able to respond to bullying. It influences how they're able to respond to kids who are hurting and not expressing themselves in the way that we may want them to. I want to tell you that professional development is important, but that the sustained efforts of developing the trauma leadership teams, I think that's really where the change happens, because you can examine policy, you can examine practices, and you can affect change more deeply in that way, particularly change at the systems level. So I want to just end there, and I want to thank you for your time and attention. I lost track of time, so I apologize for that.
You're good.
I'm good. Yeah. All right, good. But I want to thank my team here.
Yeah, they lost
Oh,
the camera on Zoom, so I just unplugged it and tried to plug it back in, but.
okay.
Can you click that? Can you click on that?
Yeah, we'll try. So I want to definitely thank my community partners, the mental health providers.
Lord.
Can you click the start video? And on
Oh, yeah, up at the top. Thank you.
top. They might have to log back in.
Okay. So I want to thank my
Just
partners
keep
in the
going.
community, and I also want to thank my team of doctoral students who've been working with me all throughout the pandemic and after the pandemic, and developing resources with community, for community, putting our self-interest in publications ahead when the situation really called for us to be working with folks in community to support them. I also there's a QR code somewhere behind this.
If you hit start, just hit start.
There's a QR code that will link you to resources that we've been developing as a result of Lehigh Valley, resources for folks across different sectors. I was trying to get you some links to some other videos that I've been gathering over the years, but I didn't have time for that. But if you follow up with me, I can send you some videos that don't include me. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to pause there and just open it up for questions, comments, concerns, ideas. Talking about is part of the curriculum for our future. Yeah. Man, what a great question. So for those of you who didn't hear, it's like what I was getting from your question was how much of this needs to get into our free service work, right? And I think a lot of it. I think we need to be I don't like the word training, but we need to inform the free service folks of what's going on and some of the things that we're learning. It's a developing area of study, like in terms of intervention. So I hesitate to say you should do this and this is where the evidence is, because it's a developing area. But we can learn from some of the things that we're already finding in the research. And I do think teachers need to learn about the brain and trauma. They need to learn how to teach kids about the brain and trauma. Some of the work that we've been doing is ensuring that that the kids and the teachers all have the same language, right, around brain and trauma. They have ways of communicating with one another without using a lot of words, because when we're experiencing heightened distress, the first thing that goes is our ability to communicate, right? So just helping people understand how to communicate in those tough times is really important. One of the things that didn't show up in the slides was our work with parents and community that we're starting. So over the last 2 years, we've also been meeting with parents fairly regularly, like monthly. I shouldn't say fairly regularly, monthly.
to learn a couple of things. One is to learn about how healing occurs within their own communities, what they do to recognize when someone's not well and how to support that individual. But from an even more prevention-oriented perspective, how do they bring joy to their own lives and to their community? And we've learned from the Latina families that singing and dancing are really important, right? We shared some of these ideas with the teachers, and they're like, "Oh, we can definitely bring dance into gym." I'm like, hold on, no, that's a behavior, right? Like, there's a deeper meaning behind the dance, right? And so you need to understand the value of it and what it means to people, as opposed to just, okay, let's do 2 steps this way and let's do 2 steps this way, right? Like, we need to actually understand what it means. But other people were talking about different types of activities they engage in that could actually promote contemplation, right? That could promote self-regulation. Building kites, as an example, in some communities, in some cultures, is central to some celebrations that they have. But just building the kite itself takes a lot of math, right? Takes maybe art, but a lot of patience also. Right? So we're just talking about these things, and what occurred to me as I was meeting with these parents was the importance for the communication to be bi-directional as it was intended, right? What we had heard from some of the parents, like, my kids are learning all these great things, they're doing these great things, but I don't know how to do them. They're teaching me how to breathe, and I don't know what that means, but I breathe and it feels good. So, like, some more work with the parents, but done in a way where it respects their agency and their strengths and their knowledge. Not just, we're going to teach you something new, right? But we're also going to learn from you, right? To make it bi-directional, I think is really important. But yeah, teaching teachers, all of them, I think is really important. Teaching education leaders about this and how to lead a trauma responsive school is really important. Not just dumping more work on teachers, and not just having more service providers come in and do more workshops or have more hours of service, which are all important, but it's not the solution. Other questions or thoughts? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you actually get more of that system level buy-in?
Yeah.
Service provider that offers it to school spaces. I feel like we have that, we try to bring that system change lens to it, but oftentimes it doesn't.
Yeah. I think that there's
connect the dots or get
the
shared buy-in. Yeah,
I want to recognize that there's a certain amount of privilege that I have, right? Being a middle-aged man, being a professor, carrying a PhD, like there's some things that I can say and people will listen when maybe they shouldn't. I'm just speaking truth here, like, and so because I recognize that, I also recognize that I need to make sure. It's like that whole Spider-Man phrase, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Because I know I have that great power, I know I need to make sure that I'm responsible with it, and then I'm bringing other people into the conversation, right? Not just other middle-aged men, right? Like I need to make sure those spaces are inclusive. Now, I think one of the wonderful things about Resilient Lehigh Valley is that, like, we work together. And because we have a sort of a lead organization that has money in small grants, we're able to leverage that. So we say, if you want this money for services, you kind of need to follow our values. You need to understand what our values are, and you need to kind of get on the same page with us. And so no one individual is on their own in this collective of ours. Like, we work together. and through our lead agency. And that's been really helpful. Like even as a professor of a major university with dollars, like it's more powerful when it comes from an entire community.
So is that the collective impact model for
Yeah.
way?
Yeah. Yeah. And there are wonderful folks at UB who do this type of work, who can do this work, the Birdie Center, right? Like I'm not trying to put more work on you all, but like this is the type of work that I know school psychologists are interested in. I like the prevention side, the work on changing systems. So you have people who are really knowledgeable of that, the theorizing, the research, and the practice. So leverage your relationships with the people here at the Birdie Center. So, is that good? Okay. All right. Other questions? There was another hand in the back before.
It's kind of similar, it's just like how to implement or get started, like these ideas and
Yeah.
some better, like how to set that conversation.
Yeah. So I think that's a slightly different question, and it's a good one. I think that so the other day I was invited to give a talk to parents, to Spanish speaking parents, and I had a translator. So, when I talked to you earlier, like, oh, I have a lot of partners in the community, community school coordinators, and we talk about the things that they need, and they're like, hey, can you come and do a talk? And like, sure. It's one of the things that we do as academics. We reach out to the community, share what we know. And this talk was on diversity issues, and the importance of racial and cultural socialization for Latino youth. And we talked about like all the different things that the families could do with the school. And we had a school board member and the school leaders there, and nodding their heads, and hopefully I get invited back to deepen that work. But it takes time, I guess is what I'm saying. Like it takes some of the initial relationships. There are different entry points. It could be parents, it could be an in-service. It could be a meeting with the leader, it could be a meeting with the school psychologist, just sharing some ideas, sussing out where they are in their stage of change. Like I think about stages of change a lot. Are people and organizations at that pre-contemplative stage, or they contemplative stage, or the maintenance stage, or the action stage, right? And I target an intervention or an approach based on where I assess them to be organizationally or as an individual, right? And I share that with you because you can't get someone to say, we're going to do a trauma responsive school if they're pre-contemplative and not even acknowledging that trauma exists. So your goal then needs to be on helping them understand that trauma happens. We didn't do it, right? But we could do a whole lot to prevent re-traumatizing kids. So you plant some seeds and you move that needle along, and it's painful, long work. It's not fast, right? But I think if you take that approach, that mindset, that's the mindset I've taken. It's been helpful for me. And there are times when leaders are like really invested. This is something I learned the past 10 months. Because I thought the school was really ready. Like really, really ready. Principal was really, really ready. And the principal is really, really ready. But they've got so much going on in that building. Every day there's a lockdown or two. Right. And so even though they're ready, they don't have the capacity. Right. So it's dealing with the capacity issues at that point. Right. It's redelegating leadership in a way that makes sense for that school so that the work can get done while they're still putting out the fires. Hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, I'm reflecting a lot, like as a school counselor in that high school. And you brought up like this leadership team and using like school personnel. And I'm just wondering how you like, do you have any like thoughts or guidance for navigating like developing this leadership team when it's mostly like like personnel base.
Yeah,
Because there's a lot of people that I know want to do this work, want to have these types of conversations, don't mention like daily conversations. And I guess I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
yeah, really great question. So there are a couple things actually. So I'm glad you brought it up. One is the leadership teams. There are in Pennsylvania, we have these things called like 48 credits, the professional development, continuing education credits for that all educators need to get, right? I'm guessing there's something similar here in the state of New York. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that those credits are attached so that the teachers, it's not a reward, but it's an acknowledgement of the time, right? Because these teachers would do it anyway. But to lessen the load somewhere else is really important because, you know, this is all about like self-care, right? Self-care is really important. We need to make sure that the work is sustained. So we make sure they get credits. So I'm meeting with the team right now weekly because that school is so much stress. It's taken a toll on me, to be real honest, but I enjoy the work. But when it comes to schools that are racially homogenous and like predominantly white in terms of the educators, and it doesn't match the schools, which happens a lot. There's a whole long history of that. You know, there are several schools that I've worked with where I've talked to the principals, and we've just made sure that we get as many you know, divergent perspectives and people of color as possible. And they could be in different roles. They could be the community school coordinator. They could be parents. They could be informal leaders within the community, right? That we bring into the space. Ultimately, it's up to the leader, the principal, the building leader. Like I stay away from making choices because I don't know the staff or the personnel. I just want to make sure that the teams are as diverse as possible. But even then, right, there are some folks within communities of color who also don't believe that trauma is a real thing and that it's like, so it's not as though you have this, this answer, right? Something else you brought up raised another point that I want to bring into this space here. And that is, it's related to the stages of change, but I don't think any of us should ever endeavor to change every single person's mind. You're always going to have about 15 to 20% of the people who are going to be champions, natural leaders and champions of your cause. You're going to have about 10, 15% of people who are just going to say no to everything, right? And are hateful. But there's a huge chunk of people in the middle who are wanting to be moved, but also wanting to be supported. That's something that we learned from our research. Like the teachers felt better about their work when they felt like the administration was behind them. And that's not a surprise. It's been indicated in a lot of research.
I feel like I know I could talk about this and talk with Dr. Liang all day, but for those of us that I want to respect our time too. So I'm going to cut off the questions now and invite people to thank Dr. Liang and also start to enjoy some lunch. I'm going to turn the tables on you and say you're going to be here for a while. So if people do want to come up and engage in some conversation or have some questions, I think you'll be open to that.
And my flight leaves at 5.
But we all
Up until then.
1:30.
Anyway, thank you all for your time.